It is time for the Cyber Executive Podcast, where we talk to industry experts about risk, technology, and leadership. I am your host, Marc Ashworth, and today I have the pleasure of having my friend Melissa Dukascheck, the owner of Present Moment Yoga, with me here today. Melissa, thank you very much for being my next guest on the Cyber Executive Podcast.
You are welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm sure our audience is wondering is why do I have a yoga person on to talk today? And being that this is being recorded in May, it is also mental health awareness month, and so because of that, I thought it would be a good time to talk about stress and how we can alleviate stress and provide that work life balance with that, because cyber is very stressful, executive positions are very stressful, life is really stressful, and what better way to have someone other than Melissa, a fitness expert and yoga expert, to help kind of talk about things. So Melissa, managing stress in a job is challenging. So one of the things you hear a lot is around diet and exercise is so important to managing stress. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely agree. I can only imagine what a cyber job is like because I'm not very tech savvy at all. But I can imagine that there's a lot of stress involved in that. And any job has its own stress of some sort. So I feel like, if you can incorporate in some way exercise and healthy eating habits into your life, it's going to help mitigate the effects of stress at work. So, exercise helps us to regulate our stress hormones. It burns cortisol, it releases endorphins, and it brings you into a calmer state of mind. It helps you reduce your anxiety. And so, if you can get up early in the morning and go for a run or go to the gym, you're already setting yourself up for a better day. Or, on the other end, if you've had a stressful day at work, if you can get some exercise in, that is going to help you kind of release the effects of the day if it was particularly stressful.
Yeah, definitely. And I know just, going to the gym, making that first step to get in there is always a challenge. But once you get out of there, you feel so much better about yourself, and just kind of, you know, throwing some weights around or doing some stretching or positions, it just helps so much to make you feel just more calm and relaxed and good about yourself in general. So
Absolutely. And then on the other end of that question that you ask about diet, if you're feeding your body sugary foods and foods with very little nutritional content, you're not nourishing your body. You're not, giving it great fuel to work with. So, if you can, in addition to getting some exercise in, make sure that you're eating foods that nourish your mind and body, it'll also help you to stay less stressed throughout the day.
yeah, definitely. And, your body shows stress in different ways, and each person shows things, shows stress different ways, whether, it could be weight gain, or for me, I have Bell's palsy. And so whenever I get stressed, but, this side kind of goes numb on me, or the eye doesn't quite work right, or the smile. And that's so my wife always knows when I'm more stressed than not, because of those sort of things. But,
Yeah.
you know, tell tell me more about, like, how does your body tell you when you're stressed, and some signals that maybe you should be looking out for to kind of know that, hey, maybe I need to do something to get this all in check.
Well, I mean, everyone responds to stress differently, physically, emotionally, and energetically. But, common things are, you get more headaches, your muscles tighten up, you have trouble sleeping, you might be short with people around you, because you just don't have a lot of patience anymore. You might have racing thoughts. Like personally, for me, if I'm feeling a little bit stressed, I notice that my shoulders are just always up, toward my ears, or I clench my jaw, or I might have a lot of trouble, not really falling asleep, but staying asleep because I wake up and then I start thinking about, whatever it was that had stressed me out. So, I feel that physical tension in my body when a stress is not being managed well. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing you hear about is well managed, and which means different things. But when it comes to stress, what does feeling well managed look like for someone?
To me, being a yoga instructor, which, yoga means union and balance, to me, well managed means balance. So, in some way, shape, or form, finding a way to create balance in your life. So, a balance between your work and your home life, a balance between work and leisure activities that you enjoy. So, if you can, you know, yes, you have to go to work probably. Not many of us don't have, or have the ability to not go to work. But if you go to work, but yet you manage to balance that out with, time with your family or time going for a hike or doing a hobby that you enjoy, that's what well managed is to me. Like knowing a way that and actually doing it that helps you to reduce your stress, to kind of clear the slate from the day. So, like for me, I get up at 4 a.m. every morning and lift and work out before I go do yoga all day. But it's just a way for me to do something specific for myself that helps me balance out all of, the stress of running a business or, trying to um, plan classes for the day or all of those different things. So, but that's something that I commit to. So I feel like well managed stress is stress that you have, but you also know what helps you to um, kind of keep that in check. What can you do outside of work or outside of whatever thing in your life is challenging you and stressing you out that can kind of calm you down and bring you back to homeostasis and balance.
And don't you think consistency is key to that too, right? So, you mentioned you get
Absolutely.
up at 4 a.m. every morning. So, but being consistent on that and getting a rhythm and everything is important to keep that balance and that well managed lifestyle.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just do something one time, you're not going to be any good at it. It's not going to become a habit. So you have to, just make that commitment to do whatever the thing is, journal, go for a walk, sit in meditation, whatever your thing is. Maybe you like to play basketball and that reduces your stress. And that's something you commit to doing 2 or 3 times a week. Whatever it is, just making that commitment and sticking to it. And I know we're busy and, it can be hard to be, consistent all the time, but just doing your very best, just some small, simple step is helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, and signing up for classes, whether it's yoga or with a personal trainer or something along that line, where's that accountability for me is something that I have to do. And, because then I know, okay, I'm paying money for this and, it's on the calendar. I'm going to go do it because of that. And that helps with that consistency and that accountability, which works well for me. And I'm sure for a lot of other people.
I mean, a lot of people find that's a very helpful method. If I've paid for this, I'm going to go do it, so
Mhm.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
it's
And
just the
that's a lot
fact that,
different than just,
you've asked somebody else for their time and you don't want to, back out on that too. So that's often a big motivator.
yeah, and it's a lot different than just signing up for a gym and, to where you have that membership, it's more than that at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that way you can
Yeah,
skip it if you want to.
that's right. That's right. So let's talk diet for a moment. There are a lot of different types of diets out there. You hear the Mediterranean, you hear, uh, uh, the carnivore and all these different things. But what do you recommend for a proper diet? Whether it's to lose weight, manage stress, or whatever it might be.
Now, I have a bit of a problem with like, saying I'm on a diet or, I use this diet. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying those things at all, but I just feel like if you can find a way to incorporate predominantly whole foods into your diet, drink plenty of water, get plenty of sleep, get movement every day, and just kind of do something that helps reduce your stress, you're going to be well on your way to living a healthy lifestyle. Um, I feel really strongly that our health, yes, people go to the gym, they run and all these things, but I think our health really starts in the kitchen. And if you can stock your refrigerator, your pantry, all of those things with healthy foods and eliminate a lot of the processed foods, the easy packaged convenience foods, and just bring in apples and, spinach and things like that. And, healthy, if you eat a lot of meat, bring in low fat, grain fed, healthy foods like that. I think you're going to find that you're going to lose weight a lot quicker than you think, and you're going to be building muscle and, a healthy body versus trying to restrain from, like trying to restrict yourself. I feel like if you allow yourself to have whole healthy foods, you're going to do much better than if you say, I'm on this diet and I can only have this or I can only have that. um, I don't know, that's why I struggle with the word diet, just because it feels so restrictive. And I think that's why a lot of people don't do well on diets. And not everybody. Some people do really well on them. But in my personal experience, I feel like just bringing healthy foods into your home and just not buying those other convenience foods is a huge part of, staying on track.
Mhm. Yeah, and diet to me seems to be more temporary. If you're going to do that for immediate loss or something, maybe, but that's not a lifestyle change, and to really eat healthy is a lifestyle change that you need to do. I know my weakness is sugary coffees. White chocolate mocha is the death of me, and that's still a problem for me. And back whenever I used to work with you on that sort of stuff, that was my problem then. I hate to tell you now, Melissa, it's still my problem. But
All right. You
but
can't
you
give
got to
up
have your
everything,
vice, right?
right?
That's right. That's right. So, but having that temporary lifestyle change is one thing, but you have to incorporate that in the long run, and make those other changes, whether it's processed foods or whatever it might be. And one of the things that you hear a lot is around counting calories and daily intake of calories and what that should look like. What's your thoughts on that, and what's the best thing maybe to measure if you are trying to lose weight, which I think a lot of people try to do. And But what's a good way to better measure that than maybe calorie intake?
I mean, a lot of people do well with numbers. They like to count calories. But what I always suggest to people is that it's more the quality of your calories than
Mhm.
the actual calories themselves. I mean, if you can eat a lot of empty calories and still restrict yourself to whatever number you've chosen, but they're not nutritious. So I look more at, okay, maybe I'm getting a few more calories from nuts and avocados and those type of things, but they are healthy calories. They're, highly nutritious. They do more for my body and my overall health and wellness than the same number of calories from, something processed. So to me, counting calories looks more like looking at the quality of those calories and the types of foods that I'm eating. And then instead of, I mean, mainly just eating until I feel comfortably full, learning to slow down and those types of things and eat until I feel full versus, okay, I've had my 1,200 calories today and I need to stop and I can't eat anymore.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. I know one tip that you gave us a long time ago was around portion size, around, if it's the size of your hand or the palm of your hand, then that's a decent portion size of protein to work with. And obviously not every calorie is a good calorie. And, I think what you basically just said is my white chocolate mocha is not a good thing to have for if I'm trying to count calories, right? Because there's 500 calories in that, so that's going to take away a big portion of that. Versus if I have a palm-sized thing of chicken, that's not only going to give me a high protein amount, it's going to make me feel more full, but it's also better for you in general, right? So,
Well, I mean, not to, make fun of your white chocolate mocha, but yes, you're right. I mean, the
yeah.
protein and the calories that come from that chicken breast is going to be better for you overall than the coffee. But also, if you try to abstain from everything that brings you joy, you're going to get frustrated eventually too. So there has to be, we're going
Right.
back to that word of like balance, managing our stress. You don't want to stress yourself out because you don't get coffee every so often.
That's right. Yeah, limit it to maybe once a week instead of every few days or
There you
however
go.
often I do that, right?
There you go.
One of the things that is very beneficial that I think if you are trying to manage things, it is tracking what you eat. And there's a lot of great apps out there like Lose It and a few others, Weight Watchers or whatever it has it and stuff too. But it's amazing whenever you go back through the day and you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, I eat that, and didn't really realize it. And looking at the macros and those components of it, I think is very beneficial. So what's your thoughts on tracking what you eat and from a diet perspective, and why is that so important, do you think?
I think tracking can be really helpful, especially in the beginning stages of a health journey. Like if you really have never really paid attention to what you're eating. And I think it's really helpful to just keep a food journal for, at least a week, just to kind of see what you eat and write down everything, because you're going to find out, especially, and not to single anyone out, but like, you know, moms with small children, how often, or even dads with small children, how often do you just eat that last bite of macaroni off their plate? Oh, that looks good. I'll eat that. I didn't eat much today. And it just adds up. Like we don't realize that just all these little things that we just pop into our mouth during the day, whether it's out of boredom, or actual hunger, it could be both. But I think that when you are initially trying to kind of get an idea of what you're actually eating and how the weight is coming onto your body and how to get it off, it's really helpful to write down everything that you eat. Or if you won't do that, I mean, everybody's got a phone on them these days. Take a picture of, every meal that you eat and look at your portion
Mhm.
sizes, look at the quality of the food that's on there. And I think, tracking and then paying attention to the quality of your food go hand in hand. Okay, so, I ate all of this. How many of the things on this list are really good for me? And how many of these are just comfort foods of some sort, or something I'm eating out of boredom, or something because it was left in the break room? What do I need and what don't I need?
Mhm. Yeah, but if it's on someone else's plates, then those calories don't count. Isn't that right? So, if you can eat that, or if you're traveling, calories don't count if you travel and you're on a road trip.
Right.
As far as
That's true.
how the saying
So
goes.
you can
Yeah.
skip those calories, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So, we talked about consistency is key. What are some healthy tips to stay on track? I know part of your business is to help advise people on, wellness and everything. And so, what's some of the tips that you help people do to stay on track?
Well, I know I probably sound like a broken record here today, but, you know, as far as, diet and things like that, I really recommend, eating whole, unprocessed foods as much as possible, staying hydrated, trying to eat the rainbow, getting a lot of a variety of different fruits and vegetables. And, if you are someone who eats meat, eating like grass fed, very lean meat, it's high in protein. If you're not, then trying to get your protein from eggs or, other, vegan or vegetarian sources. um, I tell people that, some sort of daily movement is a good thing. I'm not saying that you work out and lift heavy every day. Maybe do that 3 or 4 days a week, and then do some kind of active recovery or a walk or a hike, maybe take a bike ride, or even just spend a day just doing some yin style yoga, more restorative yoga, something to just stretch your body and help it recover. I also advocate for, some breaks from technology. Just kind of give your eyes a break, give your brain a break. Just step away from the phone, away from the computer, the television, and just get outside, some fresh air. So all of those things, we sometimes people just look at, losing weight and getting healthy as just something that has to do with food and exercise. But we also need to take into account all the other areas of our lives, like what are our social interactions like? How much time do we spend doing things we love? Do we get enough fresh air, enough sunlight? So I often, advocate for all of those things when people are trying to change their, lifestyle to a more healthier one.
Yeah, I know one thing I do, and anyone that works with me on, when I'm at home, and if it's a nice day, they'll see me sitting outside for the conference calls, so,
Yeah.
uh, just having that outdoor, that fresh air, that fresh sunlight and stuff like that just helps, keep things calm so, get out of the your office and get out there and live off of a single monitor or move your other monitors out there if you have to, I
Yeah.
guess, but that fresh air, hearing the birds chirp and all the other stuff,
It
it
just makes
does
you
help
feel
out a
better.
lot. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, kind of change things away from food here a little bit. There's lots of different things that could be done to reduce stress, and one of those things is meditation. So, what are some of the benefits of meditation in reducing stress?
Well, it helps you to connect with your breath. It helps to quiet down the mind and pulls you into more of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest state, versus the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight kind of state. So it kind of just it quiets you down a little bit. And people are sometimes under the impression that if you can't completely quiet your mind, that you're not meditating, you're not able to meditate. But, really, I don't know very many people that can completely quiet the mind. The meditation is more about just taking some time for yourself, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 30 seconds at a stoplight, and just taking a few deep breaths, coming to your center, and just trying to quiet the mind in some way. And eventually it gets easier. I found that for me, starting a meditation practice was much easier when I did a guided meditation. Because instead of listening to my own chatter in my head, I was, listening to somebody else who was directing me to do specific things. But so the meditation itself is just really good for quieting down that chatter that we all have up in our head, and that leads to more stress sometimes if we let it get out of control. And then it brings your heart rate down once you kind of tuned out the chatter, quiets your breath down a little bit, and it helps you to relax all the physical tension in your body as well.
Yeah, and I know every time, like at a lot of the end of the yoga sessions, you have what the savasana,
Yes,
if I'm saying that right.
you are.
And I know that's always, which for me, those are the most stressful times because my body's relaxed and I'm sitting there with my eyes open, going, "Don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep." So for me, that part is I don't get that benefit because whenever I don't do that, I fall asleep. So that part but you're so relaxed afterwards, and that part's really great, which I think is one of the big benefits of yoga is, that relaxation component of it, as well as the stressing. But can you've been doing and teaching yoga for what, 20 years or more, is not longer, and and you have such a great practice and everything. Can you kind of help talk about how yoga can be beneficial in relieving stress?
Well, so many ways. The yoga postures themselves, which is, a lot of people think that that's all yoga is just doing these weird shapes with your body or sitting there chanting weird sounding words. But really, the postures themselves help to stretch not only the muscles, but the different tissues in the body. And, you store so many things in your body. You store emotions, you store physical tension. And so moving your body through these different movements, helps to release a lot of stuck energy and tension in the body. The deep breathing, just like meditation, that helps to pull you out of the sympathetic nervous system and just into a calmer state. And then we've already talked about the benefits of the meditative part of a yoga practice. So, yoga is not just doing weird shapes with your body and trying to see if you can stand on your head. It's about getting in touch with your body, listening to it, recognizing when you can go further, and learning to pull away from the ego and not go further if your body's not ready for that. It's There's just so many different ways that yoga can benefit people other than just being a form of exercise.
Hmm. You know, I've done a lot of your classes in the past, and what two of my favorites is the outdoor along the riverfront, the sunrise type of yoga classes, and then those are always, again, you're outdoors, so how can it go wrong unless it starts raining? But you know,
Yeah.
but that's always so relaxing to have the benefits of the stretching and then also the outdoors. But probably one of my favorite is the trapeze yoga. And,
Yes.
because I work out and, you sit there and you think that, okay, this is going to be easy, and you'll get into some position, your arms start shaking or your leg, and you're like, holy cow, it's like this shouldn't, you wouldn't think that'd be the case, but just the stretching and the movements and everything else of that, I think is just a lot of fun. And so, you know, with these different types of yoga, what is someone's never done yoga before? What would you advise for them to do?
Well, I always tell people to start where you are. So if you've never done yoga before, there's a lot of people in your same situation. So I always tell people to just start with a very basic class or take a private class, especially if you have like a recent injury or an ongoing chronic condition. It might be better just to, meet one on one with whoever you're choosing to take a class from, and just kind of let them know what's going on with you, and so that they can help you to modify. And modification using the different props, like you were talking about the trapeze class, and some people might be wondering what that is, but it's just another yoga prop. Just like you might have heard of yoga blocks, yoga straps, yoga blankets, or bolsters. The trapeze is a seat and a set of handles, and it's similar to a TRX, but it helps you to go deeper into stretches. It helps you to build strength in your posterior chain, because on the mat, we don't do a lot of pulling action. We do a lot of pushing, in different postures, and we don't do a lot of pulling. So the yoga trapeze, if anyone's wondering if that's a circus thing or if that's a yoga thing, it's another prop that you can use to go deeper into each posture. So, but what I'm saying is, if you've never done yoga before, studios have a lot of different props that you could use. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't want to use those. That's ego talking. Use the props because they can support you in the different shapes and help the postures feel better. And so eventually you won't need to use them anymore. Or you may just have a day where you feel like, I really want to use this block. I don't want to reach all the way to the floor, or I don't want to reach all the way to my toes, so I'm going to use a strap. So I always tell people when they're first starting out, if they've never done yoga before, to embrace the props, embrace the beginner level classes. Personally, when I first started doing yoga, it was right after my son was born. And I really wish I would have done it prior to that. But before that, I had been like a gym rat, and I lifted all the time, and I did the hardcore aerobic classes and things like that. Well, I had my son and I was tired and sleep deprived, and I'm like, oh, I'll go take a yoga class. But me listening to my ego instead of my body went to a power yoga class because, that's what I had done before I had a baby. Why can't I do it now? So, and I was never so sore in my life. I took this power class and I struggled because, I had just had a baby and I didn't listen to my body. And I just tried to do what I thought I could do because I did that, 9, 12 months earlier. So, yeah, I always tell people that have never done yoga before to be honest with themselves about where they're at and what they know about yoga, and then start at the very basic level. And if that's easy, then, work your way up. But don't put yourself through the, torturous hot yoga class or the power yoga class until you have a basic understanding of, the different ways to breathe, the different ways to use the props, the different ways to move your body.
Yeah, and I think with the props, one of the coolest part is getting that extra stretch sometimes, like with the bolster or the strap,
Yeah.
and just tying that in with the different position, and especially like back related ones with the bolster and certain moves off of there. I think really helps on getting that extra stretch and just pausing there and just letting your body just relax and feel that. And so with the stretching, how important is it really to stretch? You hear some benefits and stuff off of it, but what's some advantages to that? And that's probably a really dumb question, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So
Oh, no, it's not a dumb question. I think it's imperative to stretch, especially if you're someone who sits a lot during the day, or, when you do go to the gym, you are a heavy lifter. It's good for balance. If you stretch your muscles, you help to lubricate the joints, you bring that synovial fluid into the joints, move it around. You keep balance in your body. The muscles, need to be both strong and flexible. So stretching is important for everyone, you know. So I don't think that's a dumb question at all. I just think everybody, a lot of people like to leave the stretching out, the cool down out after they run, or
mhm.
whatever, but it's important to just do a few minutes of just a quad stretch or a hamstring stretch after you go for a run. Stretch your calves, stretch your tibialis, and just take a little bit of time to bring your body back to a more neutral place.
Yeah. So how many days a week do you recommend for people to work out?
I guess that depends on what your definition of workout is. I think that if you're and I'm not a personal trainer, so,
Mhm.
I'm not pretending that I am. But as far as, a hard workout, I would think that, 3 to 4 days is good for that. But I also am a firm believer in that there should be some kind of movement every day, whether it's just a stretch day or a yin yoga day that's a more restorative practice. Or maybe you go for a hike, or it's a beautiful spring day, so you hop on your bike, just some kind of movement every day. I don't advocate for 7 days a week of heavy powerlifting unless that's your job, and even then I think balance is good. But I do feel like some kind of movement every day is a good thing. Maybe taking one day off to not really do a whole lot won't hurt. But I feel like if you move your body every day, you're keeping your stress in balance, you're keeping your muscles stretched out, you're just doing good things for your future self.
Mhm. Yeah, and simple things like taking the elevator or not taking the elevator. Don't take the elevator. Not take the elevator
We
and take
talked
the
about that.
stairs instead. And then also, if you're going shopping, park further away from the door, and instead of
Exactly.
up close. Those simple little things like that just get some extra
Yes.
steps.
Yes. I tell people that all the time. Start with something simple that you can do. You don't have to park right next to Target.
Mhm.
Park at the end of the lot. It's going to save door dings on your car, and it's going to get you some extra steps in, so do that kind of thing. Or like you just said, take the elevator or take the steps instead of the elevator. Simple things like that. Drink an extra glass of water, just pick something or several little small things that you can do, and do those every day.
Yeah, definitely. So, is there any sort of like exercises I should avoid? And I know that's a loaded question because if you're just getting into exercise, then you probably shouldn't, put on 400 pounds on a on a barbell and try to, squat that or deadlift or something like that. So, is there anything that you kind of recommend uh, from that side of things?
Well, again, I'm not a personal trainer, but as far as exercise in general goes, I mean, I'm a firm believer in listening to your body. If you've got an injury to your back or your knee, then you're going to want to avoid, things that, heavy lifting things that put strain in those areas. You want to do the more modified versions of things and build up. So, any exercise that causes you pain, you probably need to avoid it until you're ready for it. And you may never be. That's one thing that I have to tell people a lot in the studio. You may never do the splits, and that's okay. Your body may not do that. So you may never bench press the number that you have in your head, and that's okay. Maybe your shoulders don't let you do that. Maybe it hurts your back. But, just so, that question, any exercise that you should avoid, that varies person to person. So the key there from a yoga perspective is listening to your body and honoring that, honoring your limitations, and not doing the things that cause you pain until you've worked through the reasons behind that pain. And if that happens,
Yeah,
great. If it
definitely.
doesn't, then there are plenty of other exercises that you can do with similar benefits.
Yeah, and I think we should say the normal caveat before you start any exercise program. You should probably talk to your doctor first and those sort of things before you
Absolutely.
do that. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're
Yeah.
not
Let's throw
doctors
that in
here.
there. We're not doctors. I'm not a
Yeah,
personal
yeah,
trainer, but in the studio, I always tell people, especially if they come in after a surgery or after some kind of serious health condition, I ask them if their doctor has told them it's okay to come into practice because, I'd like to be a member of their health and wellness team and not somebody that is asking them to do the exact opposite of what another, you know, person on their team has asked them to do.
yeah. So, Melissa, if someone wanted to work with you, on training from a yoga perspective, is how can they get a hold of you?
Well, we have a website. It's presentmomentyoga.com, which lists all of the things going on in the studio, all the classes that I have. Um, my email and my phone number are on that site. We're also on Facebook and Instagram as far as, just what's going on at the studio and just little helpful tips there. So, but the best way to just kind of find out what we've got going on is to go to presentmomentyoga.com and just check out what we have to offer. You mentioned the riverfront class, and we have our first one for the
Mhm.
season Saturday morning. So I'm looking at the weather and it's looking pretty good. But we also have lots of other different yoga related events at the studio throughout the month. So, and then our class times and how to contact me about private classes are all also on that site.
Do you still do? I know at one point you were doing virtual classes. Do you still do virtual classes?
No, I don't do those any longer.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I thought I would throw that out there. So, all right. Well,
No.
Melissa, I appreciate it. There's a lot of wonderful information to kind of help reduce stress and get people into that well balanced lifestyle. And thank you so much for being part of the Cyber Executive Podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
I'm glad to have you. And for everyone else, please be sure to like and follow and to share the podcast. And we look forward to next week's conversation. Thank you again for joining the Cyber Executive Podcast.
Okay.